Check out this nice demo I have here. So once you refresh, this fades in. If you go to the second section, this fades in. And the third section, this fades in each image one after the other. There are a lot of libraries you can use to achieve this, but in this video, I'll be showing you how to do this with the Intersection Observer API. This API in JavaScript is a powerful API, and there are a lot of use cases for it, from transitions like this to lazy loading and many more interesting things. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'll help you understand how this API works, the different options that you have available to you, and then we can see how to use this API to achieve the transitions I have in this demo. So let's get to it. So we're going to be starting with this. You can see when I scroll, no transitions, just our plain demo. This is the HTML part here. This is the CSS part. This is the JavaScript part. For these images here, I got them from Unsplash. So these are the images. Okay, let's briefly go through the code. I'm not really going to dive into the CSS layout here, but here I have my div with first section, and then I have h1, this p tag, and this image tag, and then this content which has some random lorem ipsums. Then for the second part, I have my second section, h2 second section, and my image, and that's all. For the third section, I have my h2 third section, div with a class of images, and in this div I have 3 images. And then this is the CSS where I have some flex and some grid to have this layout here. Okay, let's go to the JavaScript and begin using our Intersection Observer API. So here, the first thing I want to do is to create a new instance of the Intersection Observer. So I'm going to assign this to an observer variable, and I'm going to have new Intersection Observer. Now this Intersection Observer can receive 2 arguments. The first argument is a callback function that will be called when an element that you're observing intersects, and the second argument is an options argument, which allows you to configure the observer and define at what points do you want things to intersect. So let me just come here and create a function called callback function, and let me also create an empty object for the options. Now that you have this observer, you can now observe some elements. So here I can say observer.observe, and then I observe the first section. First section is coming from here. This is where I query all the 3 sections. I can also do observe second section and observe third section. So here I am using one observer to observe 3 elements. Another thing you can do is to create multiple observers for different elements. So for example, here I can say this is observer 1, which executes callback function 1 with options 1, and then I can say observer 1.observe first section, and then here I can maybe have observer 2 with callback function 2 and options 2, and then here I can say observer 2.observe second section. So you can choose to have different observers with different options and different callback functions for the elements you want to observe, or you can just use one observer to observe multiple elements. For this video, I'm going to be using one observer for multiple elements, but I just wanted to show you that you can have multiple observers. Now this callback function is going to receive an entries argument, and this entries argument is going to be an array of all the elements that you are observing. So in this case, by passing this callback function to this observer and using this observer to observe these 3 elements, it means these 3 elements are going to be passed as an array to the entries here. And now we can simply come here and do console.log entries. So now if I should open the console, if I should refresh, you see we have an array of 3 entries. So we have the first one, the second one, and the third one. If we open the first one, you can see this is first section. Open the second one, this is second section. Open the third one, this is third section. Now the way the Intersection Observer works is that you have your options where you decide at what point should the elements you're observing intersect. And once those elements are intersecting, then this callback function would be called with all your entries. So what you would often want to do here is to do entries.forEach. So for each entry, you can now do something with that entry. Let's just say we do console.log entry so that we can see what the entry object looks like. Oh no, this should be like this. Yeah. So if we come here now, you can see each of the entries here. For this entry object, you have bounding client rect, intersection ratio is intersecting, is visible. There are a couple of properties for the entry object. We're not going to be using all of them, but we're going to be using mostly the is intersecting. Now, another thing you need to know with this intersection observer is that when you create a new instance and you pass your callback function callback function is going to be called the first time. And that is why even if some elements here are not currently intersecting, we already have our callback function executed. So here, like I said, the entry object has different properties, and one of those properties is intersecting, is intersecting, sorry. This property is going to be true if this entry is intersecting, and it's going to be false if this entry is not intersecting. So here, let's just do console.log entry.target. Target is going to point to the element you're observing, .id. Now coming to the options, there are a couple of properties here you can pass as your options. There's the root property, there's the root margin property, and there is the threshold property. This root property allows you to define what your container is, the container of the element that you are observing. This is going to be a parent element, and in that element, the observer can see if each of your elements are intersecting in that parent container. So here you can use a div, a section, any element in your DOM, but if you pass null or you don't even pass the root property at all, by default, the root property is going to point to the body element in the DOM. Now, what about the root margin? The root margin allows you to define the margins around that root container. By default, this has a value of 0 pixels, but you can have your CSS margins here. So you can have maybe 100 pixels for the top, 10 pixels for the right, 50 pixels for the bottom, and 20 pixels for the left. And this is going to affect how your elements intersect in that container. Later on, I'm going to show you how exactly this works. Now, coming to the threshold property, this property allows you to define at what percentage of intersection do you want your callback function to be called. If you have a threshold of 1, it means when 100% of that element is intersecting, your callback function will be called. If you have 0.5, it means when 50%, 0.2 when 20%. And you can also choose to have an array of thresholds. So here you can have 0.2, 0.5, 1, which means at 20% of intersection, your callback function will be called. At 50%, it will be called. At 100%, it will also be called. Let's keep this at threshold 1 for now. Okay, now that we have these options and we have this callback function, let's now come here to see how it works. So I'm going to refresh. So when I refresh, you can see now that the first section is not logged here. Even though you can actually see the first section here, or maybe if we bring this down a bit, even if you can see the first section with the contents here, this is not logged here. And that is because 100% of the first section is currently not intersecting. And we're going to fix that in a second, but let's keep scrolling. Now, when we get to the second section, watch what happens in the console here when everything in the second section comes into view. You can see at this point when everything comes into view, you now have second section logged to the console. So this is what happens with the intersection observer. As your elements intersect based on the options you have specified, your callback function will be called. And let's go to the third section. So this is the third section. Immediately everything intersects, comes into view. We now have third section here. But we'll go back to the first section. It doesn't 100% intersect. Now, like I said, that is because if you see the first section, you notice that we have to scroll to see more of the first section. We are not seeing 100% of the first section at once. But now what if we come and we put the threshold of 0.5, which is 50%. Now if I should refresh, you can now see we have first section here, and that is because at least 50% of the first section is intersecting, it is in view. So we have this. Now when we go to the blue, you see that we don't even have to get to the end of the second section before we have this logged. That is because at this point here, 50% of the second section is in view, and then same thing for the third section. At this point, 50% is in view. Now one more thing you want to note is that you see when we get to the end, if we go back and the second section is intersecting again, we have second section logged here. If we go to the top, when the first section is intersecting, we have this logged here. So the more you scroll up and scroll down, the intersection observer keeps executing that callback function. So what you might want to do is that after you have done what you want to do with the entry, you can now do observer.onObserve, and then you can pass the entry. So let me take this observer and the options to the top here. So when you say unobserve, it means it's going to stop observing. So now if I should go here and refresh again, now we're getting an error. Oh, instead of passing the entry, you want to pass the entry.target, which is the element itself. So now if we come back here, if I refresh, you see we have the first section, this is logged. We have the second section intersecting. We have the third section intersecting. But if we scroll back to the top, even though those things are are still intersecting, we have stopped observing those elements. So depending on your use case, this will help you avoid memory leaks or affect the performance of your applications. If you are done observing and doing everything you want to do when it intersects, then you might want to unobserve that element. Okay, coming back to this root margin. Like I said, this root margin allows you to define the margins around the parent container. Now, it's not very easy to visualize how the root margin works here, but here is a good visualizer that Michael Baker created. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. But this is how the root margin works. So by default, the root margin is 0, which means this is our parent container and this is the element. So with a threshold of 100%, it means that if you're scrolling here, you can see that this first element is 100% in view. It is 100% intersecting. As you get to this point, this one is currently intersecting because 100% is in view. But now let's say you specify a root margin of 150 pixels. This is for the top, right, bottom, and left. Now you can see now that the bounding container is now bigger. It is no longer this rectangle here. It is now everything around here. So which means that at this point here, this first item, it is intersecting. Even though you don't actually see it in view, it is still intersecting based on the bounding container that we have defined here. And same thing if you scroll down, see the second item here. At this point down here, just look at this black container here, or this faded container. This is also intersecting. Even though you cannot see it on the screen here, it is still intersecting because we increased the root margin. We made the bounding container or the observing container bigger. I can also use negative values. Let's use a negative value like 30 pixels for top, right, bottom, left. Now this is going to mean that this rectangle is the screen. This rectangle is the screen that the user sees. But because we use a root margin of -30 pixels, the bounding container actually starts from here. So which means even at this point here, this first item is not 100% intersecting. Even though you can see 100% of it on the screen, because we have specified a bounding container with a root margin of -30 pixels, it means at this point here, only maybe 80% is intersecting. The remaining 20% is not intersecting, which means 100% is not intersecting. So for 100% to intersect, it means that everything has to be in the shape. So this root margin can be a bit difficult to understand, but thankfully this visualizer makes things easier to view. So this root margin, think of it as it allows you to grow or shrink your bounding container, which is observing the elements. So which means if you go back to this first example here, remember when I put this as a threshold of 1, because we are not seeing 100% of this first section, it's not intersecting. But let's say I have 0 pixels for top, 0 pixels for right, and let's say I have 100 pixels for bottom and 0 pixels for left. Because I've now increased the bounding container, which means from here to here plus 100 pixels, even though we cannot see the remaining 100 pixels. Now, if I should refresh, we'll get first section. Okay, maybe 100 pixels is small. Let me keep this at 700 pixels. So you're going to have from here to here plus 700 pixels that we are not seeing as the container. And now if I should refresh, you see we get first section. So this is how root margins allows you to expand your containers. Now if we go to the blue section, you can see that we are not even seeing 100% of the second section, but we already have second section logged to the console yet. That is because from here to here plus 700 pixels, the second section is intersecting. Same thing if we go to the third section. So I hope this helps. I would leave a link to this below so that you can experiment and see how root margins works. But like I said, it allows you to expand or shrink your bounding container. So far we have seen how the intersection observer API works. Now let's use this to add some nice animations to our website. So I'm going to keep these at 0 pixels so I don't have to start doing some complicated calculations in my head. And for the threshold, I'm going to keep this at 0.5. Now coming here, I'm going to check if entry is intersecting. What I want to do is that if entry.target.id is first section, oh, I should also put this in bracket. I've been writing Python a lot recently, so I usually forget about the parentheses. So if this is the first section, we want to do entry.target.classLists, and we want to add a class called loaded. I'm going to do if target, oh, not target, if target.id is second section, I want to add a class of fade in. And if target.id target.id is third section, then I want to add animate. Then regardless of the entry at the end, I want to call unobserved entry.target. Oh, one more thing I also forgot to show you is that, remember I said you can have multiple thresholds here. So let's say I have a threshold of 0.2, 0.5. And let me just quickly show you this before we continue. So console log entry.target.id. But one thing you can also do is you can check the intersection ratio. So you can say if entry.intersection ratio is greater than 20%, then we can do console log target.id. Let me also put maybe console log 20%. And you can also say if the intersection ratio is greater than 0.5, then we can do 50%. Now let's open the console and refresh again, because this is currently intersecting at least 20% and 50%. We have these logs here. Now let's scroll to the next section. You see that as the blue gets 20%, we already have 20% second section. And as we continue, as we get to the 50%, oh, we are not seeing the 50% because we unobserved. So after the 20%, we have already unobserved, and that is how we're not getting the 50%. So let me just comment that part for now. All right, let's start again. So for the first section, we have 20% and 50%. Then for the second section, at 20%, we get that. Then at 50%, we also get this again. Then for the third section, at 20%, you get that. And then at 50%, you get the callback again. But I'm just going to put this back. I just wanted to show you how different thresholds can work, but I'm going to keep this back at 0.5. All right, let's continue again with our animation. Now for our CSS, in the case of this first section, I can say that by default, the first section has a visibility of hidden, opacity of 0, transform with a translate Y of 100 pixels, and transition for the transform and the opacity. When I have this, currently the first section is invisible. Then I can now say that when the first section has the loaded class, then here I can now say the opacity should be 1, the visibility should be visible. By the way, if you want to learn the difference between opacity, visibility, and maybe the display property, I have a video on that. I'll link it below. Then I can add a transform for the y-axis translate, and then I can have 0 pixels. So now once I refresh, because it's intersecting, the loaded class is added and all of this is triggered. So boom. For the second section, the idea here is instead of just styling the whole second section at once, I'm going to do it individually for the H2 and for the IMG. So here we have visibility, hidden, opacity 0, translate Y 100 pixels, and of course the transition. And then I can also say that the second section IMG should have a transition delay of 300 milliseconds so that two of them don't appear at once. The image can trigger its own transition after 300 milliseconds. And then I can also say that when the second section has a class called fade in, the H2, and also when the second section has a class of fade in, IMG should have a visibility of visible, an opacity of 1, and a transform of translate Y 0 pixels. Okay, now that we have this, let's see this again. So once we refresh, the first section is animated. Then we go to the second section. See, currently we haven't gotten to the 50% point, but as we get to the 50% point, you can see how the first one comes before the second one. Also, instead of repeating myself like this, I can use the is pseudo class to say is h2 img. So this is the same thing as what I did before, but now I have, of course, few lines of code. With the is, I can now select the h2 of this and the img of this. And let's see this again. Well, because I like the animation, if we come here, you see now we have this. All right, let's go to the third section. So similar idea with the third section, hidden, 0 opacity, translate Y, and our transition. Then here I can say third section dot animate. This is the class that we add when the third section is intersecting. And I can do my is again, have h2 and img, visibility, visible, opacity, 0, 1, with a translate Y of 0 pixels. First intersect, we have this. Second intersect, we have this. Third intersect, we have this. But then it's not nice that the three images are coming at once. So let's add some delays again. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say the third section IMG should have a transition delay. But in this transition delay, I'm going to do some calculation. So I'm going to say calc, and then I'm going to multiply the index custom property on each IMG multiplied by 300 milliseconds. Well, where is the index property? Well, I can choose to do it directly directly here in CSS, do img nth child of 1 custom index 1, and I can repeat this for 2 and 3. Let's see how it actually works. So this is going to be index times 300 milliseconds, which means the first img is going to have 1 times 300 milliseconds, then this one 2 times 300 milliseconds, then this one 3 times 300 milliseconds. So now if I should refresh this, well, let's go to the bottom. You can see the first one comes, the second one comes, the third one comes. So I can either choose to do it like this, or I can go to my HTML. For the first img, I have a class where I specify index of 1, second image has index of 2, third image has index of 3. Oh, sorry, not class, style. Yeah, I knew something was off there. So I can have style, like an inline style here, and the same concept applies. First fades in, second fades in, and the third 1, 2, 3. Let's even make this more obvious by adding 1000 milliseconds. You shouldn't do this because the animation is going to be very slow, but let's just see how it works. So when we get here, you can see after 1 second this, 1 second this, 1 second this. Yeah, this is not great. With 300 milliseconds, this is much smoother. So this is how the intersection observer allows you to do interesting things in your applications, and I'm going to make more videos showing you more things you can do with intersection observer. You can do as many interesting things as you want to do here. Once you get your is intersecting, you can do your checks, run your code, whatever it is, you can explore and have fun. I'm really hoping that this video gives you a good understanding of how the intersection observer API works, and also with this example you can see one of the interesting ways you can make your website more smooth or looking nice with the simple effects that we have here. Well, I have more CSS demos on my channel, and you can see 2 of the demos currently on the screen. You can check out any of them that you're interested in, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with others, and follow me for more simplified CSS videos like this.